Donald, Daffy, Darkwing, Plucky, Psyduck, Launchpad, Danger Duck, Mighty Ducks, Magica, Scrooge. Why so many ducks? Hi, I'm Dr. Panda, the only panda who sometimes wears a beak, and in this video, we need to talk about the insane amount of ducks in animation. How did it all begin? What makes ducks so appealing to animators? And why was there a particular boom during the 80s and 90s? Let's get started. Before the 1930s, a few ducks had already appeared in animated shorts, like Funny Duck in Oswald the Lucky Rabbit cartoons, but they were so unimportant that they weren't even given proper names. They were just disposable background characters with no real depth. The duck that truly started it all appeared in 1934 in Disney's short The Wise Little Hen, and his story is more interesting than you'd expect. It all began with a newspaper ad in which Disney announced they were looking for people who could imitate animal sounds for their cartoons. That ad reached the hands of voice performer Clarence Nash, who, though he didn't know it at the time, would become so important to the company that he'd even be named a Disney legend 60 years later. Nash showed up at the Disney studios for his audition without expecting much, and for what happened next, there are two versions of the story. The first version says that Nash stood in front of a casting director at Walt Disney Studios and did his voice impression of a billy goat reciting "Mary Had a Little Lamb," a bit he'd been doing since he was a kid. After hearing it, the director reached for the intercom and told Walt Disney directly, "I think we've found our duck." The second version, and my personal favorite, says that Nash demonstrated several of his voices, and right when he was doing his impression of a family of ducks, Walt Disney happened to walk by. Impressed by his performance, Walt told him he was perfect for the role of a talking duck in his next animated short. Either way, this audition led Nash to be hired by Disney for a small animated gig that would earn him a few dollars. The animated short starred the wise little hen, Peter Pig, and most importantly, the reason this short is so well remembered, the very first appearance of Donald Duck. The story follows the wise little hen as she looks for someone to help her plant corn for the winter. She asks both Peter Pig and Donald, but they both fake stomach aches to get out of working, so the hen is left to plant alone with her chicks. When harvest time comes, the hen asks for help again and gets the same response from the pig and the duck, but this time, she sees right through it, and together with her chicks, she hatches a plan. She cooks a feast full of corn-based dishes and goes back to Peter and Donald, except that before she can even offer them the food, they start pretending to have their chronic stomach pains again. The hen tells them she actually needs help eating all the food she made, which excites them and makes them run to her house. But when they arrive, all they get is a bottle of castor oil for their stomachache, leaving them regretful while the hen and her chicks enjoy their corn feast. The animated short was released on July 9, 1934, a date Disney considers Donald's official birthday, whose first words, by the way, were, His original appearance was similar to the Donald we know today, wearing his now classic sailor suit because of the traditional association between ducks and sailors with water, but his features were more elongated and his feet smaller. His personality wasn't defined yet, and his role was limited to being the unhelpful friend alongside Peter Pig, with no real depth, and there's a reason for that. Disney had no concrete plans for the selfish duck. He was meant to appear once and then fade into obscurity like so many other one-off characters. But two things made them decide to bring him back. The first was that Walt was delighted with Nash's performance and wanted to keep working with him. And the second, and most important, was that Donald unexpectedly became a massive hit with audiences. Absolutely everyone was talking about him. In fact, his impact was so strong that Disney decided to reuse the character barely 3 months later. This happened in August 1934, in the short Orphan's Benefit, which also marked the first time Donald appeared on screen alongside none other than Mickey Mouse. And the reason this short became key to cementing Donald as one of Disney's signature characters was, you know what? Let's see if you can spot it. The short follows Mickey, who's hosting a benefit performance for a group of mouse orphans in a local theater. For the first act, Donald recites "Mary Had a Little Lamb and Little Boy Blue," but the orphans begin to disrupt the performance by blowing their noses in raging Donald, who's eventually dragged off stage. Goofy and friends then appear to perform an acrobatic dance, but everything goes wrong when they have a bunch of accidents. Donald returns to recite "Little Boy Blue" again, but this time he blows his own horn before the orphans can interrupt him. However, just when he thinks he's won, the orphans start attacking him with weapons and boxing gloves, forcing the duck off the stage for a second time. After a performance by Clara Cluck with Mickey, Donald returns one last time to try and recite "Little Boy Blue" again, but the orphans continue attacking the poor duck with bricks, egg cartons, and even fire extinguishers, finally forcing him to admit defeat. those little devils. This short helped expand Donald's personality, moving him beyond the role of the lazy friend and giving him more defined traits that we still see today, such as his love of showmanship, fierce determination, and especially his short temper. But more importantly, here's the reason Donald truly took off at Disney after this short, a reason the studio didn't expect at all. Essentially, Orphan's Benefit is a slapstick comedy short. Audiences laughed at how Donald became the victim of physical mishaps caused by the kids, much like they did with Charlie Chaplin or Buster Keaton. But there was one big difference that made Donald feel like a breath of fresh air for the fans. Donald's abrasive, grumpy personality in the face of misfortune added a whole new layer of comedy. It wasn't just funny because of what happened to him like in Chaplin's shorts. What made it even funnier was the way he reacted. It was completely revolutionary. In fact, the impact was so huge that Ward Kimball, one of Disney's legendary animators who worked on the short, called it a turning point for the studio, as it made everyone have an opinion about Donald. Some hated him, some loved him, some even booed him, but nobody was indifferent to the duck. Thanks to these two shorts, Donald became a prominent figure in Mickey's cartoons. In 1936 and 1937, Donald was redesigned to look rounder and cuter. He began starring in solo cartoons like Don Donald, and was given his very own love interest whose name was, you know it, so say it with me, Donna, who would later evolve into Daisy. But while Donald was basking in the sweet glow of fame and success, a parallel story was unfolding in another studio. Warner Bros. Was releasing a Porky Pig short like any other. The short was titled Porky's Duck Hunt, and it showed Porky preparing for a day of hunting, only to run into all kinds of mishaps, and among those silly obstacles was a nearly unnamed duck. Porky tried to hunt him, but was taken aback when he realized the bird was combative, constantly outsmarting him and mocking him after his failed attempts. The short revolved around Porky. Porky was the protagonist, but for some reason, audiences leaving the theater couldn't stop talking about that eccentric duck. And honestly, who could blame them? This duck had something special. He was completely unpredictable and unhinged. Like when Porky thinks he's finally shot him and sends his dog to retrieve the body, only for the duck to throw the dog right back at him. The audience's reaction to his debut led Daffy to appear in more and more Warner shorts, quickly becoming one of the studio's most popular characters. His hyperactive, over-the-top personality made him stand out, and in those early years, he almost always came out on top. So then, what happened? How did he go from being that wild, triumphant duck to the temperamental, greedy loser we know today? Two unfortunate words: Bugs Bunny. Daffy and Bugs first appeared together in the iconic 1951 short Rabbit Fire. And the problem for Daffy was that Bugs, who had debuted 3 years after him, had become insanely popular with the fans thanks to his clever and confident personality, which pushed Daffy into becoming the butt of the joke, transforming his own personality to fit his new role as the loser. Here's the thing though, the two most important ducks in animation, who would later inspire the creation of countless other duck characters, actually came to be purely by chance. Warner only created Daffy because Porky needed something to hunt, and Donald only came to be because Clarence Nash happened to be really good at imitating duck sounds. Neither Disney nor Warner had any idea how big these ducks would become, and the impact they'd have on so many future characters of animation. The ducks that came after can be divided into two groups. The first group started in 1937, when Donald's popularity was still so high that he began appearing in all kinds of media, including comic strips. Initially, these were short stories showing him in funny situations, but when artist Carl Barks joined the project, he started developing longer stories that placed Donald in more detailed roles, like that of a treasure hunter. For this, Donald couldn't appear alone, so new supporting characters were created, like his nephews, Ludwig von Drake or Scrooge McDuck, who, as you can see, are Donald's direct relatives and therefore had to be ducks. Eventually, the Donald Duck universe got its own animated series, DuckTales, which introduced more duck characters like Launchpad McQuack, who, even though he wasn't a direct relative of Donald, was a close family friend, so it made sense that he was a duck too. Later on, more duck characters appeared in Disney's Duck universe, like Darkwing Duck in his own series alongside Launchpad, who also wasn't a direct relative of Donald, but required a similar artistic style. So, what the hell? Let's make him a duck too. What I'm trying to say here is that for this group of characters, if Donald had been a koala, they would have been koalas too. They're ducks simply because they're connected to Donald by blood or by artistic logic. But then we have the second group, the ducks who aren't from Disney and don't have a direct connection to Donald. Remember how both Donald and Daffy initially looked very different from the versions we know today? At first, neither Disney nor Warner had particularly high expectations for either of them, but they accidentally stumbled upon a goldmine. From there, they refined them until they reached the looks and personalities we know now. And this is key because without even meaning to, both studios found the perfect animal for animation, along with mice, as we analyzed in this other video that you should also go check out. Think about it. For starters, ducks have round, expressive shapes, which makes them ideal for animations involving slapstick comedy because of their squash and stretch qualities, the most important principle in animation. This principle is based on the idea that during motion, only stiff objects remain inert, while objects that aren't stiff tend to change shape depending on inertia and the elasticity of the moving object. Furthermore, duck bodies are usually simple in design, often just one color, which makes them easy to animate unlike, say, a tiger. Also, their beaks serve multiple purposes. First, they act as an extremely flexible mouth, allowing animators to exaggerate a character's emotions. Second, their prominence and bright colors like orange or yellow grab the audience's attention and make them stand out. And third, I don't know, a character with a prominent beak is just inherently funny. On top of that, ducks' wings naturally function as arms without breaking visual logic. It just feels normal to see Donald using his opposable wing thumbs to hold, a gun. And lastly, there's the versatility in storytelling. Ducks are one of the few animals that can exist in water, on land, and in the air, giving artists complete narrative freedom for over 90 years. That's why, along with the huge influence of the two big ducks, new duck characters kept popping up. This happened sporadically over the years, of course, until the 80s and 90s when, bam, ducks everywhere. But why? In 1987, Disney launched the DuckTales series, which featured a huge number of ducks on TV. Right from the start, even if no one else had been making duck projects, you could have already said there was a surplus of them. But the thing is that Warner released Tiny Toon Adventures 3 years later, adding the Daffy-inspired Plucky Duck to the ever-growing list of ducks. And just as the 90s rolled in, Disney doubled down on its duck propaganda by launching Darkwing Duck. Add to that the emergence of this guy in his Danger Mouse spin-off and the infamous Marvel movie Howard the Duck, who interestingly, in his original comic design didn't wear pants, but a legal threat from Disney forced Marvel to redesign him because he looked too similar to Donald. And look at them now, joined together like the best of besties. As far as I can tell, all these ducks appearing within a 10-year span was kind of a coincidence, like that time Disney and DreamWorks released 2 films with the same idea just 1 year apart. But then there's Mighty Ducks. Oh, Mighty Ducks. Mighty Ducks was a live-action movie trilogy released by Disney between 1992 and 1996, following a group of human hockey players through different competitions. The thing is that right in the middle of this duck fever of the 80s and 90s, Disney conveniently decided to launch an animated series based on Mighty Ducks, but with a small change. The series would take place on a planet in an alternate universe populated exclusively by, anthropomorphic ducks. Also, conveniently, the planet is icy, which makes it perfect for playing hockey. And yeah, as you can see, that's a pretty strange leap. I mean, other than hockey in the title, there isn't much of a connection between the show and the movies it was based on. Also, let me know if you'd like me to cover Mighty Ducks in a future video. I don't have proof, but come on, I refuse to believe this was just a coincidence. Disney saw the success of DuckTales and Darkwing Duck and said screw it. There's only one way to guarantee this show's commercial success. And this was especially important for Disney at the time, because they owned their very own NHL team called the Mighty Ducks of Anaheim, so they needed to keep boosting its popularity. And it's not just me saying there was a duck fever in the 80s and 90s. This was so real that it actually forced a drastic change in a cartoon that's now considered a classic. Animaniacs is a beloved 90s series following Yakko, Wakko, and Dot, these quirky creatures who live in the Warner Water Tower. The show was produced by Steven Spielberg, and originally, the designs of the main characters were very different. That's right, they were gonna be ducks. However, Spielberg and the creative team realized that there were already way too many ducks on TV, so they decided to redesign the characters until they became the versions we know today. Remember this guy? Man, he was weird, always obsessed with his buttocks. So weird, in fact, that I still can't believe he was ever allowed on Cartoon Network. But the more I looked into it, the weirder things got, like the bizarre way his creator came up with the character. Made a video about it, and you can check it out right here. Subscribe for more. Dr. Panda out.